He's got to be one of the most prolific criminals when you think of the other murder cases that are connected and all the rape cases. And God knows what else we don't know
about. He's not concerned about human life. He enjoys the terror. He enjoys inflicting that type of an emotional type pain on people.
During that time frame, everybody was in fear. We had people sleeping with shotguns. We had people purchasing dogs. People were concerned, and they had a right to be. This guy was terrorizing the community.
Gilchrist County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I just shot my daughter and shot all my grandkids, and I'll be sitting on my step, and then when you get here, I'm going to shoot myself. You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing in Nancy Park.
You admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
All crimes have a motive. Go beyond the blood and discover the reasoning behind the darkest crimes in history.
The summer of 1976 was a momentous time in America's history. The military had recently withdrawn from Vietnam. Americans still feared the threat of the Soviet Union. The bicentennial of America was upon the nation. This meant backyard gatherings, parades, pageants, and dancing the night away. America was still in love with the counterculture movement, a movement represented by tie-dye and free love. The name Charles Manson was becoming infamous. The Zodiac Killer had shocked the country. Disco was still alive and well. America in 1976 was nothing like the America of 2016. However, a criminal was afoot the likes of California or the nation had ever seen. More elusive than the Zodiac Killer, a serial predator, he was organized and stalked his prey with lust. He struck in the comfort of their homes, with the victim of choice being that of a lone woman, which this would eventually evolve. Visualize you are alone home, resting in your bed. Peace and tranquility overcome your mind, and you gently drift off to sleep. You are awakened by a constant tapping on the bedroom door frame. When you glance towards the source of the sound, what you view is nothing short of terror. An unknown figure is standing before you, tapping some sort of object, which you shortly realize is a knife. Before you can react, a light is shined in your face, and you are paralyzed with fear. You realize the figure is wearing a mask and gloves, dark t-shirt, but was nude from the waist down. Perhaps most terrifying is the man is aroused by your fear. He continues to tap the knife against the doorframe. The only give in his mask is the holes which give way to his eyes. He jolts towards you and rips the covers away, and he moves the knife towards your face. He speaks through clenched teeth, perhaps attempting to conceal his true voice. He threatens to kill you with the knife he is holding against your body. He commands you to disrobe. He notices a female hygienic product, but this cannot deter the maniac from his grand plan. He pulls your hands behind your back and ties them. Must be with a pre-cut fabric. He scours the room, but for what? As he returns, he bounds your hands, yet again with a belt. He then carries out a terrifying sexual attack, but you are alive. But when you try to speak, he snarls, "Shut up." He ties your ankles with the hairdryer he found in the house. You can hear this psycho speaking, almost as if he has an accomplice to his revolting crime. He speaks to someone and tells them to shut up, but you notice this is not directed towards you. The investigators answer your calls only after the suspect manages to escape the scene of this gruesome action. The assailant was about 5'9", with somewhat of a muscular build, you tell detectives. You estimate the perpetrator was about 20 or 25 years old. He had dark leg hairs, which might indicate the male had dark in color hair throughout his body. Despite the house being ransacked, nothing of value is taken. Unfortunately, this is no nightmare, although I would hate for anyone to dream this. It was Friday, June 18, 1976. The crime took place at approximately 4 a.m. on Paseo Drive in Rancho Cordova. This was the first victim of the East Area rapist. His MO had not yet been fine-tuned. The actual victim stated the unnecessary actions of ransacking the house caused her more fear than the sexual assault itself. It appears that terror was what the East Area rapist fed off. Rancho Cordova is a distinctly middle to lower middle class suburban community on the east of the state capital, Sacramento. Throughout this episode, we'll be using multiple names the suspect has been given. He was known as the East Area Rapist, the Golden State Killer, the Diamond Knot Killer, and perhaps most notoriously of all, the original Night Stalker. However, to understand this monster, we must go back to his possible origins. Many have theorized this individual originally did not start as a sexual predator. that his original media alias was the Visalia Ransacker. The Visalia Ransacker is an unidentified burglar who committed his crimes during the mid-1970s. The first assault credited to the East Area Rapist occurred during the summer of 1976. During his crime spree, the Visalia Ransacker would burglarize single-family homes, but oddly enough would only steal small items, perhaps with little to no real value. Law enforcement has pinned down that the Visalia Ransacker operated between April of 1974 and ended in late 1975. September 11, 1975, the Visalia Ransacker struck again, but this time his crimes took a much deadlier turn. The suspect, who many believe is the ransacker, broke into the home of Claude Snellen, a journalism professor at a local college. Snellen was awoken in the middle of the night by an unfamiliar noise. When Snellen went to investigate, he came face to face with a masked intruder inside his home. The intruder was attempting to kidnap his daughter Beth. A struggle ensued in which Snellen was shot and killed by the masked assailant. The suspect fled the scene empty-handed after the murder and botched kidnapping attempt. After the murder of Claude Snellen, the Visalia Police Department would no longer stand for this masked bandit turned murderer. The police staked out neighborhoods the ransacker was known to terrorize. December 12, 1975, an unknown man, who many think was a Visalia ransacker, was spotted during the night walking through one of the neighborhoods police had under surveillance. Detective William McGowan approached the unknown figure to ask him simple questions. The suspect pulled out a firearm and shot at the detective, striking his flashlight. The detective survived the attack, and the suspect managed to escape the grasp of the police. Detective McGowan continued his hunt for the ransacker after his near-fatal encounter with the suspect. After the suspect had encountered the detective, the Visalia ransacker would cease his criminal behavior, but many have wondered, did he really? At about the same time the ransacker stopped his crime spree in Visalia, a serial sexual predator dubbed the East Area Rapist began his attacks around the Sacramento area. Based on witness descriptions of the East Area Rapist and the method of operation which was used to carry out his crimes, Detective McGowan attempted to link the ransacker crimes to the sexual attacks in the Sacramento area. Both the Visalia ransacker and the East Area Rapist were described as physically fit white males in their 20s. How would this individual go from a ransacker to a sexual predator? Rancho Cordova, Del Deo, Citrus Heights, Carmichael, Sacramento. These are just a few of the many communities the East Area Rapist victimized. In all, the East Area Rapist is said to have assaulted in the neighborhood of 50 women, 50 lives torn apart, 50 lives that will never be made whole again. The East Area Rapist had a strong M.O. Stalked middle-class neighborhoods at night looking for victims who lived in single-story homes. A quick escape route had to be within reach of the house, whether it was near a school, creek, canal, but his preference was an open space in which he could flex his reported athletic build. Many times he was spotted in the neighborhoods he stalked, but when he realized his cover was blown, he would vanish out of sight. Law enforcement believed the East Area Rapist used extensive surveillance and even placed phone calls to the residences before his attack and at times after his attacks. Sometimes the caller would hang up, sometimes pretend to have the wrong number, and sometimes threatening them if the call was placed after the attack. In one of these messages, which was recorded by the victim in January 1978, the stalker repeats, quote, "Gonna kill you." His 10th victim, only 15 years of age, had received hang-up calls for weeks before the attack on December 18, 1976 in Fair Oaks. In the evening, the East Area rapist struck while her parents had been away for the evening at a Christmas party. The child had a cold and decided to stay at home. The victim played the piano as the East Area rapist struck. When the victim looked over her shoulder, the East Area rapist was there. Wearing a mask, he held a knife to the young girl's throat. Again, speaking through clenched teeth, using his mental script, demanded money. He inquired as to when her parents would return home. The victim did not know when her parents would return, and the predator ordered her to get up. He put the blade to her throat, and a characteristic line followed, quote, "Get moving. If you say anything or flinch, I'll push this knife all the way in, and I'll be gone in the dark of the night," end quote. He moved the victim into the backyard of the residence as he removed a cord from his pocket. Quote, "If you try to look at my face, I'll kill you," end quote. He then shoved her onto a picnic table and tied her ankles. Then he tied the victim's feet to one of the patio's overhang posts. He gagged her. He tied towel strips around her eyes to prevent her from seeing. The perpetrator then began rummaging inside the house, opening drawers, cupboards. Several times he muttered, "Oh, damn." She was not aware he returned until he murmured through clasped teeth, quote, "Have you ever fucked a guy?" End quote. She said no. He threatened that she better not be lying. He wanted to know if she ever felt a penis before. He would eventually take the young girl back inside the residence and sexually assault her multiple times. In some sort of sick fantasy, he moved the victim to the family room and turned on the fireplace before he would rape her again. During the ensuing investigation, detectives located perhaps what could have been a major clue in the case. The fence between the neighbors had been pushed over, and on the fence was a usable shoe print. The print showed he wore tennis shoes. This is only the second time he was known to wear tennis shoes. The pattern of the sole was zigzag. Furniture had been moved inside the residence, but detectives could not figure out why the criminal had done this. Investigators soon realized the East Area rapist had tied up the victim with her sister's shoelaces. A bizarre fact soon crossed the mind of authorities. The rapist had more than likely entered the home before and took the shoelaces with him before coming back this night. Investigators observed that the victim was the first with hair above her shoulders. All previous victims had long hair. However, a photo of the victim on the wall showed her with long hair. She had only recently cut her hair. Additionally, the parents noted the picture had been recently moved, but could not explain how or why. Another indicator the rapist had been inside the home prior to the attack. But was the East Area rapist targeting multiple homes in this neighborhood? The neighbors of the victim had a similar daughter in age, and they reported receiving hang-up calls as well prior to the attack for 3 weeks, just as the victim had. The hang-up calls, his entry to the residence prior to the attack, his carefree movements of knocking the fence over. These are all tactics of a man who had surveillance to the point where he had no worries. He knew his plan had been one where he could escape the police or that of the neighbors. The rapist knew the parents would be gone. He was watching the family and watching the parents as they departed for the party, hiding in the shadows, stalking, observing, noting movements of the family, and perhaps for weeks, analyzing behaviors. The East Area rapist would strike dozens of more times, and with them, bringing fear and terror to his victims and the community. His MO would change when Sacramento authorities were quoted in the media saying the East Area rapist would only target women alone at home. The East Area rapist must have taken this as a challenge, because he soon came to prefer attacking couples inside their residences. When a man stood at a crime prevention assembly at Del Dale Elementary School and questioned how men could fail to protect their wives, he and his wife became victims. Many had questioned if the East Area rapist attended this meeting. Did the East Area rapist take this man as a challenge? The East Area rapist victims reported that it felt like he had a particular script in his mind that he wanted to follow, and he grew agitated when anything interfered with the scenarios he had constructed. "I'll kill you," he threatened them, binding his victims, terrorizing them by rummaging their house, and even eating their leftover food. The rapist seemed to take more pleasure in causing his victims mental anguish. Not all of the East Area rapist victims would comply with his demands. July 5th, 1979, Danville, California. It was approximately 4:30 a.m. A couple was asleep in their residence when the husband awoke to a figure standing near the master bedroom. The suspect was attempting to conceal his face by trying to put on a mask over his head. This figure wore gloves and a dark blue jacket, buttoned all the way up. The husband could see white shoelaces dangling from the figure's hands. The husband was a towering figure, standing 6 foot 2 inches and weighing 220 pounds. This was no man most individuals would tangle with, and let alone the East Area rapist, who by some accounts was not a strong man despite his athletic build. Quote, "Who the fuck do you think you are?" the husband stated as he stepped towards the assailant. "What the fuck are you doing here?" End quote. The intruder, realizing that he picked the wrong man to tangle with, backed away from the husband. The husband continually screamed at the intruder, demanding the man identify himself. The wife was quickly awakened by the commotion. Due to the media attention given to the East Area Rapist, they had already rehearsed what to do if this should happen, if the East Area Rapist should select their house for his perverted fantasies. The husband blocked the man from fleeing, and the wife ran past the two. When his wife was no longer in immediate danger, the husband then ran down the stairs. The wife exited the back sliding glass door. At this point, the wife was already shouting, "Help! Help!" outside. A neighbor called law enforcement. What authorities learned is that the East Area Rapist would not put his mask on until he was ready to awaken his victims. However, what is most noteworthy about this attack in retrospect is that this was the East Area Rapist's final attack in Northern California. Authorities in the region believe the attacks had stopped until DNA linked the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker. This match would not come within a short time, but would take years of honing DNA technology. If the East Area Rapist and the ransacker are the same person, did the East Area Rapist move away from this area and cease his activities after nearly being caught as he was during his days as the ransacker? No matter his reasons for ceasing his activities in the region, the East Area Rapist would soon evolve his craft into deadly fashion. The biggest failure of the East Area Rapist would come on October 1st, 1979 in Santa Barbara County. Quote, wake up, end quote. The assailant barked at a couple asleep in their bed. Get on your stomachs. Don't move, motherfucker, or I'll kill you. Don't move or turn your head, the perpetrator shouted as he shined his trademark flashlight in their face. I gotta have money. He tossed his shoelaces on their bed. Tie his hands, the intruder would shout. Tie it tight or I'll kill you. The wife, though nude, followed the intruder's demands. Then he ordered her, get on your stomach. He tied her wrists and retied the man's wrists. He tied their ankles, but he tied the woman's insecurely. Per his script, the suspect would rummage the home, return to the woman and snarl, I can't find your purse. One move, motherfucker. He walked away, and she heard him in the kitchen, then walking down the hall, and without warning, he was standing over the female. The suspect used a pair of shorts and pulled them over her head to use as a makeshift blindfold. Now I'm going to kill you. Cut your throat, he barked. The assailant walked back to the kitchen. The victim heard him repeatedly mutter, I'll kill him, I'll kill him, I'll kill him, I'll kill him, as if he was trying to build the courage to carry out his crime. While the perpetrator was down the hall continuously talking to himself, the wife rolled and managed to get to her feet and began moving towards the front door. She fell against a wall, still blinded by the shorts the suspect placed over her head. She was successful in her attempts to open the front door as she continued to hop out into freedom of the front yard. Her ankle bindings fell free. She ran and began to shout for help. The wife fell against the wall, and without warning, a hand grabbed her and pulled her to the ground. He placed a blade against her throat and whispered, I told you to be quiet. He directed the wife back into the residence. Inside the home, he shoved her on the floor and retied her ankles. Having heard the screaming, the husband believed she was being murdered. He leaped out of bed and got to the sliding glass door of the house. He managed to make it outside and hopped into bushes in the dark shadows by the fence. The husband fell down into the bushes and began to hide. It was just in time that the husband began to hide. Within seconds, a flashlight began to scan the backyard, searching for the husband. The predator could not locate his prey. When the suspect went back inside the house, the neighbor's lights would flicker on and the husband began to yell. The suspect was losing control of the scene. During this time, the woman freed her ankles again. Her blindfold began to fall off and she could partly see. She ran down the hallway and out the front door once again. The suspect's luck would go from bad to worse, as by chance the neighbor was an off-duty FBI agent. The G-Man was now in pursuit of the suspect, who he saw running from the residence wearing a ski mask. The suspect was now on a bicycle, but the G-Man was relentless in his pursuit. The masked biker had dumped the bike, jumped over fences as the agent closed in on the suspect. Realizing perhaps it would be foolish to chase a possibly armed suspect solo, the FBI agent would await the arrival of local authorities. The suspect managed to enter the residence by prying open the rear slider door with some sort of tool. The bicycle used by the assailant to effect his escape had been stolen. It was registered to a U.S. parole officer. Authorities originally had no information that would lead them to believe this was more than a botched home invasion. The East Area Rapist had now moved out of Northern California as indicated by this botched crime. The East Area Rapist, suffering 2 defeats in a row, would inflict his rage of failure at his next victims. He would open his next chapter as the original Night Stalker. December 30th, 1979, Goleta, California. It had been some time since the East Area Rapist had struck, and the region breathed a sigh of relief. The East Area Rapist would now transform into the original Night Stalker. Angered over his botched failures, he came back to strike, and this time he was determined not to fail. In an unusual twist from his MO, he struck a condo complex. These condominiums were set among parks. Walking paths twisted and turned around the condominiums, and a creek was nearby. This was the geography the East Area rapists enjoyed. The condo belonged to an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Robert John Offerman. He lay asleep in bed. Next to him was a psychologist, Dr. Deborah Mannon. The two were awakened, but how? Were they awakened by tapping, by snarling, or the original Night Stalker's trademark flashlight? Neighbors heard shots. There was one. Then a pause. Then 3 fired in rapid succession. There was another pause. Then there was another single shot that broke this silence. The neighbors failed to inquire the nature of the shots, perhaps mistaking it for fireworks, as the New Year's was among them. What we now know is the original Night Stalker shot Dr. Offerman in the chest. Offerman spun around. The East Area rapist unloaded 3 more rounds into his back. Nude, Offerman fell to the floor. Police arrived to find Offerman as the original Night Stalker had left him. White cord was still around his left wrist. Manning was laying on the bed, on her face. Her hands were tied behind her back. She had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. All the light switches had been found in the off position, as well as the thermostat. What may have led to some confusion early on in the investigation was that Manning was only recently divorced. Perhaps detectives theorized that the former husband played a role in the murder. The type of firearm used to execute the couple had been a .38 revolver. At some point, Offerman must have resisted the original Night Stalker, and the suspect would not have 3 botched attacks. Another bizarre clue, the prints of a 3-toed dog had been found next to a size 9 Adidas running shoe prints in the backyard. A plastic bag containing turkey pieces and bones were found on the back patio. It would be highly unusual for a murderer to eat a turkey before a crime. Where did the dog come from? Was this a mere coincidence? Did the original Night Stalker bring a dog with him and feed the animal turkey parts? The original Night Stalker was calculating, and the presence of a dog, if it can be linked to the suspect, is odd, but can and must have gone along with his overall plan that night. The original Night Stalker also broke into the adjoining residence to that of the Offermans, which was vacant at the time, and stole a bicycle from a third residence in the same complex. As horrifying and bizarre as the 2 murders I just spoke about, the original Night Stalker was just warming up, just starting to obtain the taste of murder. March 13th, 1980, Ventura County. The original Night Stalker held a log that he obtained from a pile outside the bedroom on the patio and stood over his victims. Then he hit the man, Lyman Smith, once in the head and killed him. Then he hit his wife, Charlene, on the head and killed her in the same fashion. During the autopsy, the medical examiner checked the adrenaline glands of the victims and found nothing unusual. If the original Night Stalker followed his script of mental terror first, then one would suspect the adrenaline glands would show some indication of this. Nonetheless, the victims were still bound. Were they murdered first and then tied? To police, this is a sign that the killer possibly knew the Smiths. The wrist of the victim had been tied with an elaborate knot known as a lanyard by sailors and as a diamond or Chinese decorator knot by others. It is uncommon and quite a complex knot. This is not a knot most could learn on the fly. This sort of knot was documented during the East Area rapist attacks. This knot is also how the original Night Stalker earned his other famous moniker, Diamond Knot Killer. Lyman Smith was a very well-known attorney in Santa Paula. He was now being considered for an appointment to the Superior Court as a judge. Lyman had many people who might seek revenge being a powerful attorney and now soon to be judge. Lawyers are not known for their likable work, and many may deal with the unsavory sort of society. DNA proved that Charlene was raped at some point by the original Night Stalker. The original Night Stalker was now developing his MO for murder. August 19th, 1980, Dana Point, California. An average middle-class community, but with a look of almost upscale in appearance, breathtaking views, and fashionable houses. The Harrington House was located inside a gated community, providing a sense of security from robbers. The original Night Stalker was no robber. He desired fear and control, not personal possessions. On August 21st, 1980, Roger Harrington entered the home in Dana Point. Roger owned the particular home, but had been invited for dinner to the residence by his daughter-in-law, Patty. Keith and Patty never slept in the master bedroom of the residence. As Keith was preparing to graduate from medical school in the near future, the couple viewed this residence as temporary. Plus, if Roger decided he should want to stay at the house, the master bedroom seemed more appropriate for the person who actually owned the home. Roger was somewhat perplexed when he found the front door was still locked, since Roger was pretty used to the schedule of Keith and Patty. Luckily, Roger located the spare key and used the key to gain access to the residence. Inside, Roger found the house was eerily silent and noticed groceries had not been unpacked. He continued to call, "Hello," as he noticed the vehicles were still in the garage. Roger entered the spare bedroom of the house and noticed something peculiar under the bedspread. When Roger pulled the spread down, he was horrified. His son Keith was dead, and he had been dead for some time. Roger did not notice any blood, but it was clear Keith had been beaten in the head. Patty was a much different story. She was drenched in blood, and the sheets were drenched in blood. Both lay in sleeping attire. Very little was immediately known, and most information comes from Roger. Roger, though, couldn't answer clues such as if Patty had been sexually battered. Was a diamond not used? In what manner did Keith die? Several things would become clear. Patty was raped in keeping with the original Night Stalker's MO. Both had been bound. Both had been bludgeoned to death. Authorities would recover brass embedded in Patty's head. Although the police never recovered the murder weapon, the house was being fitted with a sprinkler system. Many items composed of brass would have been in the backyard for this purpose. The trail went cold until 1997, when authorities would link this crime to the East Area rapist thanks to DNA. The most likely scenario is the original Night Stalker entered the home and without detection surprised the couple days earlier. If we follow the MO of the original Night Stalker, he had Patty bind Keith. Patty would be raped in a separate room before she was brought back to the spare bedroom and bound. He struck Keith once in the head, but inflicted much worse damage to Patty, an overkill if you will. Curiously enough, the original Night Stalker did not appear to have ransacked this home. Did he feel at some point his cover was blown? Another departure from his MO is that this residence is not surrounded by parks, canals, or open spaces that he preferred in order to perfect his escape. February 6, 1981, in the city of Irvine, Manuela Wittun, a German-born and vibrant young lady, was home alone on this particular date. Her husband was sick in the hospital, which would explain his absence from the residence. Manuela would decide to make her bed for the evening a sleeping bag, as she felt more secure calling it a night inside this item on the bed. Her father offered to bring over his German Shepherd to help keep Manuela safe. Offer she declined. When the predator, who was the original Night Stalker, creeped inside the house, perhaps the dog could have alerted her. Now she was in the grips of the original Night Stalker, with no warning. Not that he would have minded killing a dog if it stood in his way. When Manuela's mother went to check on her daughter, she found her loved one dead inside the sleeping bag. Oddly, police could have been misled to think this was a robbery gone wrong. A television set had been carried out to the backyard. Items of little value had been discovered missing. Who would flee with a television set from the 80s after committing a botched burglary? Also, Manuela had been bound. That much the police could detect after finding bruises on her person. The binds, however, were nowhere to be found. Sadly, Manuela would also be sexually assaulted in a particular aggressive fashion, which left bruises on her body. Police did not think this was a botched robbery, but a murder when they examined the clues. They would suspect her husband, despite him being in the hospital. It wasn't until years later that DNA cleared the husband of any wrongdoing and linked the crime to the predator, the original Night Stalker. Goleta, July 27, 1981. This particular residence was described as pleasant, located in a cul-de-sac. Sherry Domingo was house-sitting for a relative. She had recently been laid off from her work, but she had high hopes that she would find a new job in due time. Greg Sanchez, her former partner, decided to pay a visit for the evening. Although they were no longer an item, Sherry and Greg remained good friends. The original Night Stalker knew this neighborhood. On July 26, local residents saw a white male leaning against a tree at an odd hour of the night. Later in the evening, a man and his wife reported being followed by a young man with blonde hair, which was shoulder length. Then another man jogging reported seeing the same man who had a dog with him now. These sightings were reported in the area that Sherry was house-sitting. As the house was for sale, a real estate agent would show public tours of the house. She let herself into the residence around noon. Inside the house, the real estate agent would make a gruesome discovery. A nude body of a man was covered with some clothing, and the body was slumped inside a bedroom closet. A body was under the covers of the bed. There was blood splattered throughout. The real estate agent called the listing agent, quote, "I don't know what to say, but there's the body of a man face down in the bedroom," end quote. Police would find a grisly scene upon their arrival. The male corpse was of course Greg Sanchez. It took authorities some time to come to the conclusion that Greg had been shot in the cheek, but this was a non-life-threatening wound. Unfortunately, Greg would suffer 24 beatings to his head. Sherry was nude, under the bed and bound. Sherry was struck multiple times by the same weapon that took Greg's life. DNA would once again make the link between this crime and so many other crimes committed by the same suspect. May 4th, 1986, the last reported crime in the litany of the original Night Stalker's horrendous acts. It had been 5 years since his last criminal act. He would return to a familiar city, Irvine, California. Janelle Cruz was a young 18-year-old woman. Janelle had company from a local boy for part of the evening. Her parents had recently departed for a vacation, and her sister was working a job that took her away from Irvine. While Janelle and her friend were inside the house, they heard an unfamiliar noise, much like Janelle had heard the night prior. At about 10:45 that night, her friend left the residence and Janelle went to pick up some items from a nearby store. Janelle was now alone when she returned to the residence at approximately 11:15 p.m. Like many of the other homes the original Night Stalker struck, this home was for sale. The real estate agent would discover Janelle's body at 5 p.m. the next day. The intruder must have surprised her in the kitchen. This is evident from the blood evidence throughout this area of the house. Her body was discovered nude on her bed. The method of death was similar to so many. Janelle had been struck in the head. She had been sadly raped. A blue towel was used as some sort of gag. The gag had been removed and could not be located to process for evidence. A pipe wrench, the suspected murder weapon, was missing from the backyard and to date has not been recovered. DNA, like many of these cases, would link the East Area rapist to this crime. The original Night Stalker would use a nearby canal system which showed he would return to a staple of his earlier MOs. With this mystery, the East Area rapist had returned, but for 5 years prior he had been silent and then has not been heard from since. The terrifying silence has been echoing in California since the murder of Janelle Cruz. The original Night Stalker was not entirely shy. In December 1977, letters were sent to the editor of the Sacramento Bee, the Sacramento Mayor's Office, and KVIE 6 TV station titled Excitement's Crave. Written in a poem form by an individual claiming to be the East Area rapist, it should be noted that December 11th is also the same date that a masked man, likely the original Night Stalker, eluded pursuit by multiple law enforcement personnel after he had apparently alerted authorities by telephone that he would strike on Watt Avenue that night. Though the exact author of the poem has never been proven, it is entirely possible that his successful evasion of police on that morning inspired him to write it. The following is Excitement's Crave. Quote, all those mortals survive in birth. Upon facing maturity, take inventory of their worth to prevail in society. Choosing values become a task. Oneself must seek satisfaction. The selected route will unmask. Character, when plans, take action. Accepting some work to perform at fixed pay, but promise for more, is a recognized social norm, as is decorum. Seeking lore, achieving, while others lifting, should be cause for deserving fame. Leisure tempts, excitement seeking. What's right and expected seems tame. Jesse James has been seen by all, and Son of the Sam as an author. Others now feel temptation's call. Sacramento should make an offer to make a movie of my life that will pay for my planned exile. Just now I'd like to add the wife of a mafia lord to my file. Your East Area rapist and deserving pest. See you in the press or on TV, end quote. During the investigation of the 42nd attack in Danville, investigators discovered 3 notebook pages not far from the scene of the attack, where an armed vehicle had been reportedly parked. The second page contains a journal-style entry where the author writes about a school teacher who made them write lines and how humiliating they found the experience to be. The following is the second page of the journal-style entry that authorities recovered. Quote, mad is the word that reminds me of 6th grade. I hated that year. I wish I had known what was going to be going on during my 6th grade year, the last and worst years of elementary school. Mad is the word that reminds in my head about my dreadful year as a 6th grader. My madness was one that was caused by disappointments that hurt me very much. Disappointments from my teacher, such as field trips that were planned and then canceled. My 6th grade teacher gave me a lot of disappointments that made me very mad and made me build a state of hatred in my heart. No one ever let me down that hard before, and I never hated anyone as much as I did him. Disappointment wasn't the only reason that made me mad in 6th grade class. Another was getting in trouble at school, especially talking. That's what really bugged me, was writing sentences. Those awful sentences that my teacher made me write. Hours and hours I'd sit and write 50, 100, 150 sentences. Day and night I write these dreadful paragraphs, which embarrassed me and more important, it made me ashamed of myself, which in turn, deep down inside, made me realize that write-in sentence wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to make me suffer like that. It just wasn't fair to make me sit and write until my bones ached, until my hands felt ever horrid pain it ever had. And as I wrote, I got madder and madder until I cried. I cried because I was ashamed. I cried because I was disgusted. I cried because I was mad, and I cried for myself. Kid who kept on having to write those damn sentences. My angriness from 6th grade will scar my memory for life, and I will be ashamed for my 6th grade year forever. The third page of these recovered documents is known as the punishment map. It is a hand-drawn map of what appears to be a suburban neighborhood. Investigators were unable to identify the area depicted in the map. Detective Larry Poole believes the map to be a fantasy location representing the original Night Stalker's desired striking ground. Investigators would release a profile of the original Night Stalker, which described him as a white male, dressed well, and would not stand out in an upscale neighborhood, drove a well-maintained car, emotionally aged of 26 to 30 at the time of the crimes, engaged in deviant and brutal sexual behavior in his personal life, engaged in sex with prostitutes, had a criminal record as a teenager that was expunged, had some knowledge of police investigative methods and evidence gathering techniques, had some means of income but did not work in the early morning hours, hated women for real or perceived wrongs. If married, probably has a submissive spouse who tolerated his sexual deviant behavior, intelligent and articulate, neat and well organized in his personal life, peeped into windows of many potential victims who were not attacked, possibly unmarried and did not enter into any long-term relationships, self-assured and confident in his abilities, sexually functional and capable of ejaculating with consentant and non-consentant partners, was a skilled and experienced cat burglar and may have begun that way, was in good physical condition, would appear harmless, would continue committing violent crimes until incapacitated by prison, death, or some other intervention. The original Night Stalker case was the motivating factor in the passage of legislation leading to the establishment of California's DNA database, which authorizes the collection of DNA of all accused and convicted felons in California. California's DNA retrieval and storage program is considered by researchers to be second only to Virginia's in size and effectiveness in solving cold cases. While the California DNA database, motivated by this case, has solved numerous previously unsolved cold cases across the country, the original case remains unsolved. Generally, I would give a law enforcement point of view at the close of each episode. I invite you to listen to my interview with Michelle Cruz. She is the sister of Janelle Cruz, the last known victim of the original Night Stalker. I cannot thank her enough for agreeing to take part in this podcast. Michelle and myself had more of a conversation that we did in an interview. Herself and her family have been terrorized by this predator. I cannot say enough how this conversation touched me and how much hope I have that one day this case will be solved. If you have any information about this case, if you know someone that fits the profile, who used a diamond knot for unusual ways, who professed to you some sort of brutal sex crime, that you contact the authorities, whether it's your local police or the FBI. If the original Night Stalker is still alive, as I suspect, the killer would now be approximately 68 to 75 years old. He is described as a white male, close to 6 feet tall, with blonde or light brown hair, with an athletic build. He may have an interest or training in military or law enforcement techniques, and he was proficient with firearms. Help us catch the East Area Rapist.